Well, the second part of my presentation looks at this important topic of the role of government in tourism development. And over the 65 years I've been describing to you, government obviously has had major impacts on developing tourism. Now, there are three possible roles for government. First of all is what we call an active involvement. So government decides it wants to develop tourism industry. It actually provides the investment in infrastructure, sometimes in superstructure. It builds its government-owned hotels, it develops government airlines, for example, and it provides help to the tourism sector through policy and planning. So active development then is a means which reflects the wish of government to see that sector develop. Then there is a second type of government support, which we say governments initially might take this active role, but then eventually they say, no, we've now set up the industry, we've initiated, and we want now to see the private sector taking on the major role in development. And what government then does is what we call create an enabling environment. It passes legislation, fiscal legislation, it passes regulations, which in fact helps the industry to develop. It might be offering things like investment incentives for domestic and for foreign companies. It might offer employment concessions, training concessions, and things like that. The third role is what we call benign neglect, which simply means that government doesn't either help tourism nor does it hinder it. This is not really a form of intervention, it's a form of neglect, and it certainly has no policy implications. Indicative areas of government responsibility. Now, if you ask yourself the question, why is government involved in tourism? Then when we look at these areas, we find that often government is the only organization, the only authority which can intervene. Security for nationals and visitors. If you don't have security, tourists won't come. Who provides security? Government. Maybe through a police force, maybe through the army and the military. Secondly, government is responsible for the health quality of a country and a destination. Now, this doesn't mean that security for tourists and security and health for tourists is any different from the requirements of local people. But government normally provides these things as part, if you like, of a social infrastructure. Laws, including those pertaining to tourism. So laws then may relate to, for example, if you're opening a hotel, there are so many laws you have to meet. There'll be building regulations, there will be health and safety regulations, there will be access regulations, there will be regulations relating to where you can build your hotel and where you can't be building the hotel. So there are many laws then which pertain specifically to tourism, and of course only government can introduce laws. Nobody else can. Planning and policy issues. Well, if you've got a tourism sector, you should have a policy for it, and the policy therefore guides your planning for the development of the sector. Think of another thing. Many tourist businesses are owned by foreigners, and many foreigners say, we have to bring in foreign managers who the people can do this particular job. So when I go and work in another country, I require a work permit. And a work permit then is an authorization by government which recognizes I may have special skills which otherwise are not available. But again, the private sector cannot simply bring in foreigners without government approval. Visa requirements. How often have you heard the private sector say, if you abolish visas, more tourists will come? That's probably right. But the contrary to that is, of course, government says we need visas because we therefore can have control over who comes to our country. And if we know that people are, for example, by reputation drug dealers or something like that, we will not give them a visa. Now with the visa then, what we find is here that visa requirements on a global basis have diminished. Many countries now will not require visas from certain countries. Other countries will give you visas on arrival, like Thailand, where I'm currently based. Or you find that you can apply for a visa online without ever having to go to the local embassy. So what we find then, that visas and entry requirements are very often seen as barriers to tourism development, and they are. But of course, there's a security implication for government, and only government can change these regulations. Taxation. Virtually every country in the world is short of foreign exchange, and therefore getting what we call DFI, direct foreign investment, persuading foreigners to invest in our tourism is a very competitive business. And therefore we may have to say to foreign investors, if you come in, we'll give you a tax holiday, so you don't pay any tax on your profit for 5 years, 10 years. Or we'll allow you to bring in so many foreign workers, or we will remit import and export duties for you. So all these things then, these fiscal measures which makes a destination more attractive to investor, can only be done by government. Air transport regulations I've already spoken about. The classic rule is this: the space above a country is sovereign to that particular country. So if anyone wants to fly over China, it requires the permission of the Chinese government. If anybody wants to land in China, it requires the permission of the Chinese government.